Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here at tonight's event. Tonight's event is called Defining Tragedy and Resilience. My name is Hannah Macready. I work for Event Magazine, and I'll be talking with Tsering, Yangzom, Lama, and Rahela, Nayebzadah tonight. For all of you that are here in person, please remember you can go purchase books through Iron Dog Books. They're just in the foyer there. So after the event, if you're interested in the books and you want to buy them, please support the authors and support your local independent booksellers as well. If you want to support Word Vancouver itself, donations can be made at wordvancouver.com. And there's also a silent auction happening on the website, so something to check out at the end of the festival as well. We would like to acknowledge that the festival takes place on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And we'd also just like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. A special thank you to SFU and the Writers Studio for giving this wonderful space and their generous support of Word Vancouver. We'd also like to thank Canada Council for the Arts, the Canada Book Fund, Canada Heritage Fund, BC Arts Council, Creative BC, City of Vancouver, and many more. For a full list of partners, you can go online, wordvancouver.com. And remember that this festival couldn't happen without the support of the sponsors, but also the public. So if you do want to make a donation, please feel free to do that after the event. So today we're going to start off with two readings. First reading is going to be from Rahela Nayebzadah. So Rahela holds a PhD in the Faculty of Education from the University of British Columbia. Her recent novel, Monster Child, published by Wolsak and Wynn in 2021, has been nominated for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, the Roderick Haig Bowen Regional Prize, BC and Yukon Book Prize as well. And her autobiographical novel, Jakira Ma, was based on her family's migration to Canada from Afghanistan. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to read from chapter 1. It's told from the perspective of 13-year-old May, and the family is getting ready to go to a farm to slaughter an animal. So just if there's any vegetarians in the room, I apologize. Okay. You're a disease, May, I was occasionally told, meaning one of two things. I was contagious, contaminating others with abominable infections, or like a tree, I branched out and slowly grew on people. And though they called me a tree, a disease, especially after trying to seduce my English teacher, Mr. Harvey, my sister, Shabnam, is the monster child. She's the one who cries blood. This morning, I'm woken up by Allah. Get up, Farhad's waiting in the car, he says. I look over my shoulder to catch a glimpse of the time. It's not even 5 a.m. The birds aren't even chirping yet. Can we have breakfast first? No. Getting out of bed, I try to make as much noise as possible. If I have to wake up this early on a Prodi day to see animals slaughtered for Maulad's mehmani, then so does Shabnam. I lift my torso and legs up in the air and let them fall down hard. Shabnam is still sleeping. The walls could cave in and she'd still be out cold. I wish I looked as serene when sleeping. Despite her bloody tears, Shabnam sleeps with a faint smile, mouth closed, and her hair neatly in place. I, on the other hand, sleep with my head buried in my pillow, my hair disheveled, and my mouth wide open. Some mornings, I wake up with a stiff jaw. I grab a sweater from Shabnam's dresser and head out, but first I make sure to kick the door loud and clear before dragging myself down the stairs. Maulat is on her knees, scrubbing the kitchen tiles. Why isn't she up yet? She asks Fadat, upset that Shabnam isn't behind me. She was up all night studying, Fadat says. I was up later. I even woke up with a headache. You don't see me in bed, Maulat says. Alif, however, is all set, ready to go. Dressed in a bandana, camouflage pants, vegan boots, and a shoulder bag filled with pocket knives he purchased after becoming a butcher at Kaka Farhad's Bismillah Halal market, my twat of a brother makes it no secret that he looks forward to our monthly excursions. Hunter by day, butcher by night, he tells me. You look stupid. Not as stupid as you, he says. Get moving, Fadat says, as a horn honks outside. A rusty blue car awaits us. Being the penny pincher that he is, I wouldn't be surprised if Kakafahad drives that thing into the ground. You trying to wake up the entire neighborhood? Palad says to his brother. Palad slams the passenger door shut. Salam to you too, Karim, Kakafahad says. It's not like you get along with any of your neighbors anyway. All these years, I don't think I've ever seen the two have a civil conversation. Our cousin Amir scoots to the middle of the back seat, leaving Aleph and me no other choice but to sit on either side of him. Amir spills over from his own seat, spreading his legs wide open. His thigh touches mine, and I feel like puking. I squish myself against the door. Amir doesn't take after his palat. Amir is short and stocky, and his palat is tall and lean. Amir is lazy and eats more than he breathes. Karkafatad is one of the hardest working men I've ever seen. Back in his prime, he was a well-known wrestler of Palwani in Kabul. To this day, his medals and awards are polished and displayed in his home. He was known for his impeccable balance and brute force. At the end of every match, his clothes were torn to pieces. Without question, women who came to see Karkafatad twist and turn his hips from side to side wished it were their shoulders being pinned to the ground. But just because Karkafatad was handed the better frame and height, it didn't mean that the rest of him was better. His thinning hair is unkempt. He has a creased forehead and a weather-beaten face. His eyes are sunken and hidden under dark circles. Two flaring nostrils are apparent on his crooked nose. His teeth are yellow, chipped, and crooked, and his thin lips are buried under his facial hair. And he always thinks of cigarettes. The sun shines directly into my eyes. Driving to one of just two farms in all of BC that practice the Islamic methods of slaughtering, one can imagine how daunting the essence of collective sweat can be, especially when Kakafadhad refuses to roll down the windows. The air in the car smells like morning breath and armpits. Amir, in particular, has a peculiar body odor. He smells like korma sabzi. Not even the pine tree-shaped air freshener hanging from the rear view mirror can fend off the smell. I'm not the only one irritated by the silence. Kakafadhad gives in and plays Ramza. Luckily, I brought my Discman with me so I don't have to listen to a bunch of men who sound like cats in heat. I slowly drift into sleep and Aleph nudges me. Nice try. I'm not letting you sleep your way out of this. Finally, Kakafadhad pulls into a parking lot at Mustafa's farm. It's a 2-hour drive from our rundown neighborhood of crooks, stoners, and illegals. I step out of the car and catch a whiff of fresh air at last. The sun is still blazing hot. My throat is dry. I lick the roof of my mouth. Mustafa, dressed like he's about to attend a golf tournament, steps out of his mansion. He greets Kakafadhad but not Pabat. Salam Bialajan, why don't you come inside and join us for tea? My wife just finished baking naan. Because the other halal farm is located in all-white Fort Nelson, Mustafa knows he can get away with being a dick. Thank you, but we're pressed for time today, Kakafadhad says. Everything is set up for you. Let me know if there's anything else I can do, Mustafa says. Palat and Kakafadhad go searching for the chunkiest animals to slaughter, while Aleph, Amir, and I stand still, like three sterile testicles. Mustafa's farmland is green and spacious. Lazy cows chew grass all day long. They're secluded far away from the sheep and goats. I don't know why Palat chooses to bring me here. Sometimes I wonder if he mistakes me for a boy. I spot one sheep from far away. It reminds me of lamb chop from lamb chops play along. I've never found any animal attractive, but this particular sheep is an exception. It's white, fluffy, and plump. Its pink ears hang down perfectly down its face. The teenager side of me wants to pet it. Luckily, Kakafadhad spots a sheep that's fluffier and plumper. Lamb chop is off the hook, at least for now. Holding the animal by its fore and hind legs, Kakafadhad places it down on one side. Allahu Akbar, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, he repeats. Palat pulls out his Qibla compass and places it on the ground. The Qibla is that way, he says, pointing east. Aside from butchering an animal, my family also prays in this direction 5 times a day. For a short period, the animal tries to escape. From afar, I can see a tear dribble down its face. Animals aren't as dumb as they look. At this moment, it becomes clear to them that they're drawing their last breaths, and they submit themselves. Padat hands Korkafadhad a bottle of water from Alep's bag. The thirsty animal takes its last few sips. Again, it tries to fight and then willingly submits. Padat holds the animal's hooves together as Korkafadhad lifts its head. When he makes the niyat to slaughter, he utters Bismillah. With a sharp knife, Korkafadhad slits the throat. The blood flowing out of the animal is tranquilizing. I imagine every tension in my body releasing itself into that stream of blood. Even though the eyes are still moving and there's slight movement in the feet, I find myself lost in the deep red color, a fascination I developed thanks to Shabna. The aura of blood is so overwhelming that I can almost taste it. Padat is drenched in the animal's blood too. While it is hung up to drain, Korkafadhad wipes the blood from his forehead. He passes the towel to Padat, who then wipes his scalp, neck, and forehead. Watching them pass a wet towel back and forth is more nauseating than watching the animal being cut open. Padat unfolds a newspaper and places it on the prep table. Then Korkafadhad takes the animal by the legs and places it on the paper. There's something strange about butchering an animal that brings them closer together. The younger brother does the dirty work, and the older does the bitch work. Whether Padat likes this is another story. My hands are bloody, Korkafadhad tells Amir. Go grab my bag of knives from the car. Amir runs to the car, panting so loudly that even the animals can hear him. I can't find it, he shouts. You're just as useless as Mustafa's knives, Korkafadhad shouts back. Check the glove compartment. Overworked from the jog to the car, Amir decides to walk back slowly with the knives. Run, astaghfirullah, Korkafadhad says. When disappointed by their children, white parents say Jesus Christ. Muslim parents, on the other hand, say astaghfirullah. Korkafadhad pulls out his knives and places them neatly on the ground, from biggest to smallest. His knives are so sharp, you can lose a finger just by staring at them for too long. Cutting through the wool is always the toughest task. Regardless of how sharp the knife is, the outer coat doesn't peel off easily. After the rib cage is cut open and the internal organs are removed, the animal is chopped and layers of fat are trimmed. Finally, the animal is put into oversized garbage bags before it's transferred to a wheelbarrow and jammed into the trunk of the car. No part of the animal goes to waste in our household. Slaughtering an animal according to Islamic practice is arduous. Islam is the only religion that provides detailed responses to every matter pertaining to man's life, Mawlana would always say. There was no disputing, for even something as banal as slaughtering was thoroughly laid out, step by step, in Ayatollah Sistani's exhaustive text, Fawzul al-Messiah. Get even one step wrong, and you'll be left with a haram carcass. First, the animal must be alive and fully capable of running away before it's slaughtered. And it's important that the animal is given a drink of water to show respect for both the animal and its creator. Second, the slaughtering process is to be fast and efficient, so that the animal doesn't endure a long and painful death. Thank you, and I'm sorry about that. That was very graphic.
Thank you so much, Rahela. Okay, our second reader is Tsering Yangzom Lama. Tsering's debut novel, We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies, is a New York Times Summer Reads pick and has been longlisted for the Toronto Book Award and the Center for Fiction First Novel Award, and recently the Giller Prize as well. Tsering holds an MFA in writing from Columbia University, a BA in creative writing and international relations from the University of British Columbia, and she currently lives in Vancouver.
I'm also just going to read from the beginning of my book. This is in the border of Western Tibet and Nepal, spring 1960. Amma was an oracle. The realization came to my mother late in life, when her monthly bleeding stopped and something else opened inside. Some in our village called it an affliction. They said there was a crack in her mind that left her open to spirits who would consume her. But Amma insisted it was a blessing to lend her body to the gods and allow them to speak through her. In time, everyone would listen, and the words of an otherwise ordinary woman would lead us through the coming troubles. It wasn't just my mother who had changed. Packs of wolves and rats swept through our valley. Next, there was an earthquake that tore a jagged line through our village monastery. Then, just as I was learning to speak, there came news that invaders had crossed our border, entering our land as two enormous snakes. In the distant town of Kardze, people watched them cross the river in long lines and burrow into the highlands. They wished to be called the People's Liberation Army, but we knew them as the Kyami, a people from the lowlands to the east. In the years that followed, rumors came like crows, even traveling as far west as our village. Although I was just a young girl, many of the rumors landed in my ears before anyone else in my family. My source was Laksam, my oldest friend. He worked as a servant to a traveling merchant who traded in gossip as much as iron pots and pans. In our free moments, Laksam and I wandered in the pastures with my little sister Tenki, hanging on my back or flopping around in the grass. In those hills, Laksam told me the most shocking stories. Kyami soldiers had seized farmland in the east, and many of our people were now starving. No grain, no salt, no meat, or even butter. I walked around in a daze after hearing this, unable to imagine life without butter. Laksam said that although it was quiet in our region, a resistance raged in the east, in places where iron birds circled the skies, and bullets big and small rained down on entire towns, smashing bodies as if they were nothing but effigies made of dough. Where rooftops were torn apart and no one could tell whether they had found the remains of a loved one or that of a stranger. But I did not tell my family these things. I never repeated them to anyone. Then, last spring, our village heard of a terrifying ruse, a plan to lead the precious one into the dragon's home. Hearing about this trap, thousands of our people in Lhasa gathered around the summer palace, forming a protective circle with their bodies. Even as the soldiers neared and the scent of gunpowder swirled in the air, our people refused to leave. To prevent a massacre, the precious one disguised himself as a commoner and fled south by night to another country. So did the great Neching oracle, who had divined their escape route through the mountains. When the foreign troops learned that our leader had slipped away, they pierced the crowd with bullets and lined the streets with corpses. After the precious one left, the sun was erased from our skies. Flowers refused to bloom and our yaks made no milk. In that darkness, every family in our village wondered if it was time to leave, to follow our leader to the lowlands until the day when it would be safe to return. Others recited a bleak and ancient prophecy. When the iron bird flies and horses run on wheels, the people of snows will be scattered like ants across the face of the earth. It was that day, nearly 10 years after revealing that the gods had spoken to her, when Amma said to us, "Now is the time. I must give my body to the spirits." Sitting on the kitchen floor beside my sister, I watched my father's face in the hearth's glow. Bala remained still as we chewed on strips of dried meat that Amma had cured over the winter. I could see that our father was clearly picturing everything that would change for us. But after a long while, he frowned, showing all of his new wrinkles at once, and nodded in agreement. By morning, our entire village had heard that Amma would begin the rites for instructing the gods. She would finally call them down to her. It made sense when they said Tenki was too young to watch the initiation. She was barely 10. But I couldn't believe it when Pala also ushered me out of the room. While at least 20 people from our village filed into the kitchen, many of them patting Tenki and me on our cheeks and heads as if to cheer us up, the two of us were forced to wait in the hallway. Even Laksam managed to slip in, though not without flashing a huge grin in my direction. I stood there chewing my nails until the prayers began. Then I realized what I needed to do. Taking Tenki outside, I ordered my sister to gather our sheep along the hills and bring them all back, a task that would take at least an hour, even with our dog Dixon's help. Thankfully, my sister was somewhat obedient this time. She went off in search of the sheep, and I rushed back home to watch the ceremony through a slit in the wooden door. Over a thick huddle of bodies, I saw Amma, seated on the ground with her head down. Beside her stood a teacher monk and his young assistant, who looked frightened to perform such a task when he typically spent his days carrying milk and water up to the monastery. "If you are a god," said the elderly monk as he faced my mother, "take this apron." The assistant produced an apron and tied it around my mother's waist. Amma continued to gaze the floor as her body trembled. "If you are a god, then take this drum and bell." The assistant placed these instruments in Amma's hands. Come to this woman, speak to us. Stay not at the top of the mountain, but come to us. Amma began to shake and whisper in a bird-like voice. The assistant placed a heavy embroidered cape around her shoulders, then a 5-pointed crown on her head. Despite the weight of the regalia, Amma hopped up on her feet and began to rock side to side. The assistant moved away, his eyes wide with fear, but the teacher monk called him back. Take this golden drink, he said, holding out a bowl of beer. Putting down her instruments, my mother took the bowl, offered it to the sky, and drank the beer in one gulp like a man. Then she danced, spinning left and right, jerking and dipping her head. The teacher monk leaned in, pushing my mother's shoulders down to keep her still, and spoke into her ear. She shook like a startled horse and uttered a language I could not understand. Was this the language of the gods? Hearing my mother's words, the teacher nodded and reached into a bowl of rice. With a graceful flick, he tossed a handful of grains onto the drum held flat in his hand. It sounded like a rain shower and still echoes in my head. It is dangerous to call the gods, he told the audience. We must ensure that we have not called a malicious spirit by mistake. The teacher monk also explained that if an evil spirit entered her body, there would be chaos for Amma and everyone who sought her help. On the other hand, if part of my mother's consciousness remained in her body, when a spirit entered, she would become half god and half human, and then we could not trust her words. Hearing this, I began to shake. If the gods never left my mother's body, she would never be herself again. Why would Bala agree to this? Yet it was already far too late to stop. The teacher said that it was time for the test. Amma must be able to say, without looking, exactly how many grains of rice had landed on the drum. She also needed to know the meaning of this number, what it prophesied. Pressing my face into the door, I strained to learn the outcome. I had my answer when the elderly monk slowly knelt and prostrated himself before my mother. A wave of prayers rose from the crowd as they too lowered to the floor. Only I remained standing, peering through the crack, trying in vain to catch a glimpse of my mother's face. Then my chest felt heavy like wet clay, and I was drawn face down to the floor of frozen mud, my palms pressed against my head, my lips moving rapidly in prayer as breath spread between my ribs.
Thank you so much, both of you. Those were beautiful readings. To start off, for those of you who haven't read either of these books yet, each one is written in a way that you get a different perspective from a different member of the family through each chapter. So each chapter kind of tells similar stories, but from someone else's eyes. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose that structure for your novel?
Sure. For me, okay, so Monster Child has to do with like a dysfunctional family. There's a lot of domestic abuse, and it's an unhappy marriage between the mother and the father. And I'm always very interested as to how that affects children and seeing just the world through the eyes of the children. So I could have easily chosen to do it in any other point of view, but I decided to do it through the eyes of these 3 kids. And each kid is so different. And although they see themselves as monsters, they each have their own, they battle against their own, I guess, demons. They're very innocent. And I was also very influenced by the JP&E by Wei Choi. I really loved that book. And so that kind of inspired me to write from the perspective of the 3 kids.
Yeah, I think similarly, just wanting to have lots of different perspectives in the book. Initially, I had the characters in mind before I had the story. Like I knew I wanted to write about a family, and I knew I wanted to write about a family that is fractured and spread across the world and begins in one place, but progressively grows more and more distant from each other. And in this diaspora, in exile, showing the different journeys they take and how they face their fates. So I knew I wanted to have multiple voices. But also like more deeply, I guess, structurally, it was important for me to show their relationship with each other and to not have any character be more important than any other character. And so having this sort of chorus of characters allowed me to show, one character's perspective in this very specific way, and then contrast it with another character's perspective. And then the gulf between the two and the silences between the two are also part of the story.
Yeah, I think another thing we get to see in both of your books is like the effect of displacement trauma through generations and time and place. So you really get a sense of, even though, the children in your book didn't flee Afghanistan, and the daughter in your book, just grew up in a refugee camp, you kind of get to see how it impacts them through their parents' experiences. And Tsering, you brought up silence, which is a really interesting thing that happens in both of your books. The parents are not able to talk to their children about the things they experienced, and that silence ends up being its own weight. Can you expand on that a little more? Why it was important to kind of show that?
Yeah, and I don't take silence as a purely negative thing. And I think there's a lot of weight in speaking about trauma or the past or stories. Like, and obviously we're both writers, so we believe in the power of speech and articulating these stories. But I think that sometimes the silence is an act of love. Sometimes the silence is a liberating, it's a hope to liberate the next generation, or hope to somehow clear the path for the next generation. So I see the ways in which silence can be both. It can cause more problems in a sense, because if you don't speak it, then the next generation, that's an absence that is also very, very present. But I can also understand that some things, people prefer not to utter them because, I guess in a pragmatic sense, you're talking about a bunch of refugees who want to get on with their lives and, and don't want to sit around, rehashing the past all the time, because what's back there? For some, it's like terribly dark. So I see it both ways, I guess.
So the silence that in Monster Child is kind of different. It's not so much about like displacement or what the parents, what they went through and what they left behind. It's more about what happened to 13-year-old Bay. So 13-year-old Bay gets sexually assaulted by her cousin, Amir. And Amir isn't just her cousin, but he's also a very important figure in their community. He's very religious, and he's hoping to one day grow up and become a shaykh. So he's very respected, and his family's respected. And so when she gets sexually assaulted, Bay is the type of character that if you got to know her, one would think that there's no way something like this would happen to a girl, because she's so strong. She's very strong-minded, like she's constantly cursing. She's like a tomboy. She likes to follow her brother's, path and just do like really awful, terrible, mean things as a 13-year-old. So that every time she wants to speak, something comes up in the family where she can't talk about it. And there's also she herself, she feels like a sense of shame. Like, how is this, like, how did I let this happen to me? And like, out of all the people, me. So silence works in that way. And also just there's a lot of, I guess, the mistreatment of Hazara. That was a big concept in my book too, and how, Kabulis mistreat the Hazara community in Afghanistan. Like that I also wanted to explore. Just things that aren't really things that are frowned upon in my culture, and maybe religion too. So that's how silence works in Monster Child, I think, more than the parents. It focuses more on the kids and what they go through.
Thank you. On the topic of, exploring things that are difficult in your culture, was there any trepidation about how your novels might be taken by people back home, people in your communities here?
Yeah. So, so first of all, whenever you write about any community, right? Even you tend to represent the entire community. That's just how it works. And I never want to be seen as that kind of a person, but I know what I'm getting myself into. So working carefully with Afghan voices is so important as an Afghan myself. But any person who reads this, even my family or people who just briefly know me, they know there's a lot of truth in it, and there's a lot. I put myself in every character, and some of the stuff that happens is true. I don't like to get into the details, but this is me and my family and my community. I can say that. In the beginning, I had a hard time saying that, but now it's out. People know. People know that I'm talking about my family and stuff. So it was very challenging, but I mentioned this actually earlier that once you reach a certain age, you just don't care. And if I would have written this in my early 20s, I would have probably been scared. But I'm now 36, and so I'm now more courageous, and I find it very liberating and very free to write. And I think if anyone's going to write it, it has to be me. And I think my family, they're not surprised. They know me, and they just know, like in all my books, that they have that sense of, oh my God, what is she up to? But I just think it's an exciting journey for me.
Yeah, I mean, Rahela's, mentioned the word truth, and I think that that's sort of the principal organizing or like driver for me as well. Like I'm trying to write as honestly as I can. It's a work of fiction. It's invented. These people don't exist. The story was made up as I wrote it, but I'm trying to be as honest as I can about the world that I'm trying to depict, the world views of the characters that I'm trying to understand and examine and present. And I'm trying to be honest about my perspective as well. This book has all these characters, but ultimately it all comes from me. So this is my perspective, and I have to be honest, and I have to stand behind that. I will say that, of course, I had trepidation as well. There are not that many books from my community that are published in the West, and certainly not having made it through all the gatekeepers in major publishing here. And there are really good structural reasons for that, really good like political and social and class reasons for that. And so understanding like the specific privileges that I've had, I was very conscious of taking time to research properly and to really think through what it is that I'm conveying. But my ultimate loyalty is to being as honest as I can be. I'm not here to be a mouthpiece for a community or for people, anybody beyond myself. That's my name on the cover, and that's really what I have to think about. Mm-hmm. And so it has to represent my perspective and my searching and my process and my reflection of the world.
Mm. Was there? I know that from reading about you that it took you 10 years to put this together. You did a lot of research, even going to Tibet. Did you encounter any other kind of barriers to getting the information that you needed? Same with you, Rahela. Is it difficult to, find the information, access the information when you're so far away from home?
Yeah. I mean, I think probably similar to you, like it's very difficult to go to Tibet. This is a country similar to Afghanistan, which has, been ravaged by colonialism and ongoing colonialism. So it's very difficult to get a visa, to get entry. I mean, I went to the border of Tibet and spent 15 minutes there on the border, and that's all I could do. So, I cannot actually enter. And if you do enter, you can only go to certain specific places. You're under deep surveillance. It's really not a safe place. And writers in Tibet are among the most persecuted and the biggest target, I guess. So so, if you're writing a historical novel about a place that you can't go to physically, and also about a period that hasn't been served fully by historical record, especially because I'm writing about refugees, right? They're not considered the most important people you write about. So I had to do historical research through, I guess, a very careful process of one, oral history, like interviews, reading transcripts of interviews with refugees in refugee camps, talking about the early days. Two, traveling to regions. Three, spending a lot of time in the stacks in the library, reading scholarship, scouring the internet for photos from that period, from the 60s, 70s, just to see what the landscape was like, what these camps were like. I also read organizational records, like reports from the Red Cross, just to see what I could find out about the condition of these camps. Learning that people lived on one bowl of rice a day. Okay, that's very important. So now, how do I convey that? They had these diseases. All of these things that actually, when we're talking about silence, those are the things that get silenced. Not just individually. It's not an individual choice to silence it. It's structural. It's history. It's these so these nations. It's a country that's been erased from the map. So there's so many silencing acts that are happening here. So in a sense, I'm creating a sort of history in this text.
Yeah. Well, for me, my history is a little different. I've never been to Afghanistan. I wasn't even born there. My parents don't really, this is kind of sad, but my parents don't even feel a connection to Afghanistan anymore. They fled during the Soviet invasion, and they met in Iran. So my mom was so young. She was probably, I don't know, not even 20 yet. And now when you ask them, they identify home as Iran, not Afghanistan at all, which is so sad. But me, I've always had this connection with Afghanistan because that's just my people. But then, when you grow up and you kind of become, with 9/11 and everything, you kind of become ashamed, and then you kind of silence that too. You don't want people to know you're from Afghanistan, but then you don't want people to know you're from Iran because I don't identify as Iranian. And if you know anything about the history of Iran, Afghans are very mistreated in Iran. So it was just very difficult, and especially since my parents don't really have a connection to home, like I had to kind of find that myself. And I have some family in Afghanistan right now, and I felt even more connected and more this like longing to find home ever since what happened to, like, we all know what's going on in Afghanistan right now. So for me, it was a lot of just me doing my own research and not really, like, not getting much help from my family. Do you know what I mean? They were my main resource. Like, I didn't really need to do a lot of outside research because I still know my culture very well, even though I was raised here.
Both of you have kind of mentioned, like the conflict in Afghanistan and Tibet. How does that conflict, you have a lot of pride being from, for your home country, but how does that conflict change that feeling or influence the way that you want to write about it?
Well, the conflict that's going on in Afghanistan right now, I don't know. Like, I feel more close, like myself, my relationship, but it's very tricky to write about it because people I find that people don't want to hear immigrant stories or refugee stories. I find that, especially when it comes to Afghanistan, I truly think that not a lot of people care. And so I do want to write those stories, but at the same time, kind of, I guess, have it set more in Canada or the US or something, just so people can relate to it. I don't know what more to add.
Yeah, I think there is like a sort of a headline version of understanding, like, that Tibet is an occupied country. And that's basically it for most people, right? And it's like understandable to some degree. But for me, like, this is a work of like like it's a work of fiction. So I'm really trying to think of how I can go deeper than the headline and go beyond a single message understanding of this world, these people, this community, this existence, what it feels like to be alive right now, and what it's felt like for the last few decades. And so with that, I'm really just trying to go beyond like whatever is like the surface level understanding. My driving thing there is to think about the characters and just to render them as fully and as most alive as I can. And hopefully that will give readers a deeper entry into that experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of fiction in a way. It's more approachable for people sometimes because they don't have to feel like they're researching, but being able to flesh those characters out, which you both do beautifully, really gives you a deeper connection to the story and sort of the story outside of the story as well, which is important. In both of your books, we kind of see, in Tsering's book, we get to see people as they're fleeing Tibet. In your book, they're already in Canada. Bae and Shabnam's parents have come to Canada and they've already been living there, and the kids, all they've known is Canada. But we see in the parents and the children in your book that going to a new place or escaping the conflict doesn't really make things better. This week I read an article by Danny Ramadan, who's another local author. He came to Canada as a Syrian refugee, and he wrote in his article how when he was applying for refugee status, he thought going to Canada would fix everything and then everything would get better. But when he got here, he had the hardest year of his life. He had to find a job and learn a new culture and face homophobia and bigotry all over the place. So what did you want people to know about the effects of displacement and the refugee story as a whole that maybe isn't fully understood?
Okay. I know that article you're talking about from Danny Ramadan. I actually read that one too. Yeah. It's actually in Monster Child, I think. So Aleph and Bae are born in Canada, so they feel Canadian. And as much as their parents try to push the culture on them, they try to fight back. I think they don't really connect so much to their culture, and I don't think they really realize that displacement until their family opens up a restaurant called the Afghan Nomad. And when they open that, they're met with a lot of hate, and people are kind of oh, they come in and they just want to order, the typical food, and they're kind of taken aback by having to take their shoes off. And then one day there's the message graffitied on the outside of the restaurant saying "Go home." I think that's when they first kind of realize it, and also their mother wears a hijab, so there's also that. But other than that, I think the characters really want to embrace being Canadian. I think the only character that's actually really affected by it is maybe Aleph, just because he's the only son. He's got a lot of pressure as to what's going to happen with the restaurant, if anything happens to his parents and his sisters, because he's the only son in the family. And actually, something that is very interesting is that entire section of the restaurant that's actually based on my own life story. My family, we opened an Afghan restaurant on Main Street. It was called the Silk Road Cafe. Now it's East is East in Chai. I don't know if some of you have heard of it. And when we opened it, my dad tried so hard to make it just be an Afghani restaurant, and believe it or not, but a lot of the customers, they weren't very impressed, and we did stick out like a sore thumb. We honestly did, and we did face a lot of racism. So that part of the story, I guess, means a lot to me because it's very true.
Well, I mean, I guess, this is a story of a family that is fractured. And each of the characters' experiences is very different. from the others. But overall, these are people that are, I guess like meeting up against the limitations of their circumstance, and are extremely. I think they're extraordinary people, even though they're very ordinary. They're very humble, and I think what's extraordinary about them is, I guess, their love for each other and their care, and even when they're, I guess, doing things that are wrong, that we would consider wrong, they're doing it from a place of deep love. So I guess I really wanted to convey that there's just so much love in this world that I'm writing about. And I don't know, I think that's something to be in awe of. I think that's something to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to do one more question from me, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Because the topic of this talk is defining tragedy and resilience. Both of your books make an effort to do this quite beautifully. You should all read these books if you haven't yet. They're wonderful. How would you define tragedy and resilience in your own words? Deep breath. Doesn't have to be a perfect answer. It's your own words.
Tragedy is just something, I don't know, something common that happens to everyone. It's just part of life. And I don't want anyone to take away. Okay, so a lot of people who read Monster Child, they were like, why is this so depressing? Why is this so sad? And I don't want people to be like, oh, all these immigrant refugee stories are all so sad. They're all so depressing. And but you know what? I'm not trying to say this is how our life is, but this is part of our life, and this is just what I want to write about. There are some happy moments. I don't think tragedy is something so bad. I think it gives you that opportunity to kind of grow and be resilient. And though Monster Child is such a tragic, depressing book, and all those characters, those three kids, they're fighters, I think, and they're so resilient. And I think that's what, and here, it's funny because I'm bragging about my book, but I think this is what makes, Monster Child, I feel, so powerful. Though there's all that tragicness going on, there's these characters that really flourish in life, I think.
Yeah, just like Tsering said, the love and the joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks for taking that question first, because it gave me a minute to just think about it. It's a really difficult question. But when I think about the two words, tragedy and resilience, my reading at least is like tragedy feels like something that happens from nowhere. Like there's almost a passivity. It's like just a circumstance. There's tragedy. It's just it comes from nowhere. There's no sense of like the injustices, the structural reasons, the political reasons, the power, the oppression, all of these things that cause that tragedy to occur. It's just a tragedy. And resilience for me feels troubling in another way, in that it's about the individual and their resilience, whether they have the resources or not, to face up to this tragedy that comes from nowhere, comes from somewhere, who knows? So I don't know. Those two things, I think there's something very interesting there that also could be dug into a little bit more, because there is a sense in which also the language around trauma, I don't really identify too deeply with that either. For me, this community, these people at this moment in history are engaged in a struggle. They're engaged in a struggle against a very oppressive, brutal power that has colonized them and that has created a black box around them and that has displaced them and created a refugee existence for them. So either they're in Tibet or they're in exile. But in both cases, they are subject to these forces, and they're subject to global forces that collude with or allow or look away, ignore, all of these things, profit from this tragedy that actually has a reason and has a dynamic and has a power structure and has a mechanism to make it happen. But Tibetan people in this space are incredible, I think, because against this incredible cruelty, callousness, oppression, Tibetan people have responded with love. I think that's incredible. And I think that's the struggle. The struggle is to show that this is the path. This matters. This is how we do it. Whether the other side sees it or not, I don't know. But that's been our journey. That's been our struggle.
Yeah, it seems to me like the ultimate resilience is taking the high road even when nobody else gives you a break. Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to open it up to the audience if you have any questions for Rahela or Tsering. Yeah.
So, one or two things that Tibet and Afghanistan share in common is that they're both mountainous and they don't have any access to the sea. So I'd just like to ask if those two geographic details play any role in what you wrote or not, and so if they do play a role in what ways?
So just for the live stream, so he asked, he said that Tibet and Afghanistan are both mountainous and close to the sea, and how did the geography take a role in what they've written?
Yeah, the landscape is very important in my book. The remoteness of the place, the sheer beauty of the land, it's just like, it's profoundly beautiful. And that's a deep part of the connection that the characters have with that homeland that was ripped away from them. And so I take a lot of time in my book describing that landscape, which I briefly glimpsed, but a lot of it is, based off of other research. And so the land is very important. The land, not just as a physical or geographic place, but also what it's imbued with. And yes, it is landlocked, and that does come up in the book, but mostly because it's surrounded by mountains, and that the mountains are very important for these characters because the mountains are often sites of like spiritual significance for the characters. So I wanted to convey like how important land is for these people, for this community. That home is not purely just a theoretical thing that can just be conjured, you can't just stay, it's like, this is my home. There is a significance and an importance to the land that resides in culture and identity and history and memory for these characters.
For me, like geography of Afghanistan, not so much. More about like the nostalgia from the family and like the stories and the culture that is more present in Monster Child.
Anyone else? Questions? Yeah.
So yeah, I got a question for both of you. And whether it's monsters or oracles, I'm curious about the role of magic and supernatural in your creative process.
So for the live stream, he asked what the role of magic is in the creative process.
Okay, I can go. So Monster Child, there's this one character named Shabnam, and she cries blood. And it's not just a few drops. It's like she could flood her entire surroundings. So that part, I guess there's some elements of fantasy, magic, realism, fabulism, whatever you want to call it. It's in there. And so that part was kind of hard to write. I know this wasn't your question, but it was kind of hard to write that in Monster Child. Is because how do you write a story about a girl who cries so much blood and make it realistic, kind of, and get your characters to relate to it, like how, and the whole concept of the monster. I've always been very fascinated with what makes a monster and what doesn't make a monster and who we define as monsters. And in Monster Child, the three children, they all think they're monsters, but they're not. They're all really good kids. And every character, the more you read into it, every character in Monster Child is a monster. They're fighting their own struggles. I really like your question. Thank you.
It's pretty essential to my story, to the book, because I'm talking about a belief system or a worldview that has been almost that was like directly targeted by a communist regime that overtook it and declared these indigenous beliefs to be barbaric and backward and superstitious. And I feel like that's like the story of a lot of colonization that's happened here and elsewhere. And I wanted to write from the perspective of these belief systems being legitimate and also how they face, when they have to leave the homeland, how do they survive and how do they get challenged and what are the individual effects on these individuals? Like, how do these characters who can no longer have access to these gods or have access to these rituals that are ancient and deeply meaningful, well then where are they oriented? How are they able to survive? And I think that is a displacement that is not just physical, that is spiritual displacement. And that's a big part of the story. So I wanted to center that belief system, that magic in the book for that reason.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm so glad I came to this session. You guys have just completely taken my heart. And Yangzom for the second time. Sorry, you see also. This displacement that you're referring to, I actually tried to read a sort of do displacement in reverse. I circled Nakayach, but found that I couldn't resonate in that deep way to what the people around me. I could see this river of people, and they were feeling the depth of something I could not. Although I had the deepest respect, it was it's in the blood or in the collective.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No, thank you. So Mount Kailash is a holy mountain in Western Tibet that's not just holy for Tibetan Buddhists, but also Hindus, Jains. So like 1 billion people, basically a lot of people consider that to be like the navel of the universe. It's this mountain that's almost a perfect cone and you cannot climb. And it has this scar down the road, down the entire hill. Anyways, it's a very, very ancient and important site of pilgrimage. I've been thinking about that too, because I often think about my connection to Canada, and I'm like, do I feel connected to this land? And how could I feel connected to this land? And I think that so much of that, I don't know about blood, but I think so much of that has to do with like how much time you spent there and what it's meant to you, and the work you do to connect to it, but also like the circumstances that allow you to connect to it or not. So my experience coming here was as a young child, as an immigrant, and I honestly didn't spend a lot of time, in the hills or in the forests, like deeply connecting with nature or the beauty of this landscape. I was in school, and then I was helping my mom and doing a part-time job and just kind of getting on with it and trying to figure out, how to be a good student here. And that's a very privileged position, obviously, because many immigrants come here and right away are working 2 jobs. And so how do they connect with this land? How do they find that time to, understand this place and, deeply appreciate its beauty, and it's also appreciate its brutality and its history and its meaning to the community that has resided here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that takes work, that takes privilege, that takes time, that takes so many things, right? Access in all kinds of ways. And so I think it is about labor. I think it's about circumstance, but I don't think it's in the blood. I think it's something.
Not really
Yeah.
metaphor.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, though. But it's a great question because it's something that I think about Canada.
We've hit time, so I'm going to end it there. But thank you all so much for participating. Thank you so much to our two incredible readers and writers. Please go and pick these books up. They're selling them at Iron Dog just downstairs. You can also go to your local independent bookseller. Yeah, thank you so much to the staff, the volunteers who have been working at Word Vancouver making this possible, specifically stay-at-home fundraising. And their tech team have been amazing. So thank you so much. There's one more event today. It is in this room. It's Michelle Good and Nathan Adler. So that'll be happening at 7. So please, in the meantime, go buy books and spend money on authors. That's what we're all